Alexander Chen sat in his grandmother's hospital room, holding her frail hand as she spoke in a weak but determined voice. The machines around her beeped quietly, and the smell of antiseptic filled the air. At 92, his grandmother had seen everything life could offer, but there was one thing that kept her awake at night. "You work too much, Alex," she whispered, her eyes fixed on his face. "You have money, success, everything a man could want, but you're alone. That's not living, that's just existing." Alexander wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. At 32, he had built a tech company from nothing into an empire worth millions. He owned 3 houses, drove expensive cars, and could buy anything he wanted. Yet when he came home each night, the silence was deafening. His relationships never lasted because women seemed more interested in his bank account than in him. "I've been talking to my old friend Kamala," his grandmother continued. "She has a granddaughter, a good girl, traditional values, not like these modern women who only care about money." Alexander's heart sank. An arranged marriage? In 2024? It seemed impossible, yet he could see the hope in his grandmother's tired eyes. She had been the one person who truly loved him without expecting anything in return. After his parents died, in a car accident when he was 15, she had raised him, worked double shifts to pay for his education, and celebrated every success as if it were her own. "Grandma, I don't know about this," he said softly. "Just meet her," she pleaded. "For me. If there's no connection, then nothing happens. But promise me you'll try." 3 weeks later, his grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep. Alexander stood at her funeral, surrounded by business associates and distant relatives, feeling more alone than ever. The weight of his promise pressed heavily on his chest. 2 months after the funeral, Alexander found himself driving to a small coffee shop in the suburbs, his hands sweaty on the steering wheel. Kamala Auntie had arranged this meeting with her granddaughter, and he felt ridiculous. What if she was only interested in his money? What if they had nothing in common? He walked into the cozy little cafe and looked around nervously. A young woman, sitting alone near the window, raised her hand slightly. Alexander's first thought was that she looked nothing like he had expected. She wore a simple blue dress, no makeup, and her long black hair was tied back in a neat bun. Her eyes were intelligent and calm, but she seemed as nervous as he felt. "You must be Alexander," she said with a gentle smile as he approached her table. "And you're Priya," he replied, extending his hand for a handshake. Her handshake was firm and confident, which surprised him. Most of the women he met had weak handshakes and seemed to expect him to do all the talking. They ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for a few moments. Alexander had attended hundreds of business meetings, given presentations to investors, and negotiated million-dollar deals, but he had no idea how to start a conversation with a potential wife. "This is strange, isn't it?" Priya said suddenly, breaking the silence. Alexander laughed, feeling some tension leave his shoulders. "Very strange. I keep wondering if people are staring at us, thinking we're on some kind of business meeting." "Well, in a way we are," Priya said with a small smile. "The business of figuring out if we can tolerate each other for the rest of our lives." Her honesty was refreshing. Alexander found himself relaxing as they talked. Priya worked as a librarian, she told him, and lived with her parents in a modest house about an hour away. She enjoyed reading, cooking, and had never been married before. "Why did you agree to this?" Alexander asked. "I mean, arranged marriages aren't exactly common these days." Priya stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "My grandmother and yours were very close friends. She always spoke highly of your family. And honestly, dating hasn't worked out well for me. Men either find me too boring because I don't party much, or they disappear when they realize I'm not interested in a casual relationship." Alexander nodded. He understood that feeling completely. What struck him most about Priya was what she didn't ask. She never inquired about his business, his income, or his possessions. When he mentioned he worked in technology, she simply nodded and changed the subject to ask about his hobbies. When he tried to pay for both their coffees, she insisted on paying for her own. "I can afford my own coffee," she said with a firm but kind tone. They met 3 more times over the next month. Each meeting felt more comfortable than the last. Priya was intelligent and well-read, with opinions about everything from politics to literature. She made him laugh with her dry sense of humor, and she listened carefully when he spoke about his work, stress, and loneliness. During their fourth meeting, she brought him a book she thought he might enjoy. It was a philosophy book about finding meaning and success, and Alexander was touched that she had thought about what might interest him. "You seem like someone who has achieved everything he wanted but still feels empty sometimes," she said, as she handed him the book. Alexander was amazed at how well she had read him. Most people saw his wealth and assumed he must be completely happy. What impressed him most was that Priya seemed genuinely uninterested in his lifestyle. When he mentioned his house had a pool, she shrugged and said she preferred reading by a lake. When he talked about his expensive car, she laughed and said she didn't even have a driver's license because she enjoyed walking and taking public transportation. After 2 months of regular meetings, Alexander realized something surprising. He looked forward to seeing Priya more than anything else in his week. She was calm where he was anxious, thoughtful where he was impulsive, and content where he was always searching for more. One evening, he called her on the phone. "I think we should do this," he said without any small talk. "Do what?" she asked, though he could hear in her voice that she knew what he meant. "Get married. I know it sounds crazy and we barely know each other, but I feel more comfortable with you than I have with anyone in years." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking the same thing," Priya said quietly. "You're kind, you're honest, and you don't expect me to be someone I'm not. That's more than I ever hoped for." The wedding planning was surprisingly simple. Priya's family wanted a small, traditional ceremony, and Alexander was relieved not to deal with the stress of a big wedding. His business friends were confused by his choice of a simple librarian, but Alexander didn't care what they thought. Standing at the altar 3 months after that first coffee meeting, Alexander looked at Priya in her elegant but modest wedding dress and felt something he had never experienced before: peace. She wasn't marrying him for his money, his status, or his connections. She was marrying him because she thought they could build a good life together. As they exchanged vows, Alexander thought about his grandmother and smiled. Maybe she had been right all along. Maybe the best things in life couldn't be bought or earned through hard work. Maybe sometimes the most precious things came when you stopped looking so hard and opened your heart to unexpected possibilities. Little did Alexander know that his new bride was harboring secrets that would change everything he thought he knew about their simple, honest beginning. The first month of married life felt like a dream Alexander never knew he wanted. He would wake up to the smell of fresh coffee and homemade breakfast, something he hadn't experienced since his grandmother was alive. Priya moved through their house like she belonged there, organizing his chaotic home office and adding small touches that made the place feel warm instead of just expensive. "You don't have to cook every morning," Alexander told her one Tuesday as she placed perfectly made scrambled eggs in front of him. "We can hire someone, or I can grab something on my way to work." Priya smiled and shook her head. "I like cooking. It makes me feel useful. Besides, your eating habits were terrible before we got married. I found nothing but takeout containers and energy drinks in your kitchen." Alexander had to admit she was right. For the first time in years, he felt healthy and energetic. Priya packed him lunches, made sure he ate proper dinners, and somehow convinced him to take actual breaks during his workday. His friends at the office noticed the change immediately. "Marriage suits you," said David, his business partner, during a meeting. "You seem more relaxed, less stressed." Alexander nodded. It was true. Having someone to come home to, someone who cared if he worked too late or skipped meals, made everything feel different. But there were small things about Priya that puzzled him. For instance, she claimed to know nothing about technology, yet one day he came home to find she had fixed his smart home system that had been malfunctioning for weeks. When he asked how, she did it. She laughed and said she had called customer service and followed their instructions. But Alexander knew those instructions were complicated, and she had clearly done more than just follow basic steps. Another time, he overheard her on a phone call speaking what sounded like perfect French. When he asked about it later, she said she had been talking to a wrong number and had just been trying to help the confused caller. But her French had sounded fluent, not like someone just trying to be helpful. "Where did you learn French?" he asked casually over dinner. "Oh, I picked up a little bit in college," Priya said, quickly changing the subject to ask about his day. The more Alexander observed, the more small inconsistencies he noticed. Priya's clothes were simple, but when he looked closely, they were made from expensive fabrics. Her watch looked plain, but Alexander recognized it as a limited edition piece that cost more than most people made in a year. When he mentioned it, she said it was a family heirloom. "Your family has expensive heirlooms," he said, trying to sound casual. "My grandmother saved for years to buy it," Priya replied smoothly. "She wanted to pass something valuable down to me." The explanation made sense, but something in her tone made Alexander feel like there was more to the story. What puzzled him most were her mysterious absences. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Priya would disappear for 3 to 4 hours. She always said she was going to the library to work, but when Alexander offered to drive her or pick her up, she politely declined, saying she preferred to take the bus because it gave her time to read. "The bus ride takes almost an hour each way," Alexander pointed out. "I could drive you in 20 minutes. "I like the quiet time," Priya insisted. "It helps me think." One evening, Alexander decided to surprise her with dinner at her favorite restaurant. He called her phone, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried calling the library where she worked, but they told him no one named Priya Sharma was scheduled to work that day. When she came home later that evening, Alexander mentioned the call. "Oh, they must have been confused," Priya said, not seeming worried at all. "I work part-time at the downtown branch, but sometimes they send me to other locations. The staff at the main branch doesn't always know where everyone is." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but Alexander felt a small knot of doubt in his stomach. The doubt grew stronger when he noticed how Priya handled phone calls. Whenever her phone rang, she would glance at the screen, then either answer it in another room or let it go to voicemail. The conversations he did overhear were always brief and spoken in hushed tones. "Work calling again?" he would ask when she returned. "Just library business," she would reply, "nothing important." But Alexander began to notice that these library business calls happened at strange hours. Who called about library business at 9 in the evening or 7 in the morning? One Saturday, they went shopping together. Alexander wanted to buy Priya some nice clothes, but she seemed uncomfortable in expensive stores. "This is too much," she said when he suggested a designer dress. "I don't need anything fancy." But when they walked past a bookstore, her eyes lit up. Inside, Alexander watched in amazement as Priya navigated straight to the business and economics section. She picked up several books on international trade and corporate finance, flipping through them like she was familiar with the subject matter. "Light reading," Alexander joked. "I like to stay informed about the world," Priya said, but she quickly put the books back and moved to the fiction section instead. Later that day, Alexander's curiosity got the better of him. While Priya was in the shower, he glanced at the books on her nightstand. Instead of the romance novels he expected, he found advanced texts on pharmaceutical regulations, international business law, and market analysis. These weren't books someone checked out casually from the library. They were expensive, current editions with highlighted passages and handwritten notes in the margins. When Priya came out of the bathroom, Alexander was sitting on the bed with one of the books in his hands. "Heavy reading for a librarian," he said, trying to keep his tone light. For just a moment, Priya looked startled, like she had been caught doing something wrong. Then she smiled and sat down next to him. "I have diverse interests," she said. "The library gets donated books on all kinds of subjects. I like to learn new things." "These look like textbooks, not donated books," Alexander pointed out. "They're expensive." "I bought them used online," Priya replied quickly. "You can find good deals if you know where to look." That night, as they lay in bed, Alexander stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of his feelings. He loved his wife. She was kind, intelligent, and had made his life better in every possible way. but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something important from him. The next morning, Priya was quieter than usual. She made breakfast and packed his lunch, but she seemed distracted. "Is everything okay?" Alexander asked as he got ready for work. "Of course," she said, but she didn't meet his eyes. "I just didn't sleep well." As Alexander drove to work, he found himself thinking about all the small mysteries surrounding his wife. The expensive watch, the business books, the mysterious phone calls, the fluent French, and the job that didn't seem to exist when he called. Individually, each thing had a reasonable explanation, but together, they created a picture that didn't quite make sense. He loved Priya, but he was beginning to realize that the woman he had married might not be exactly who she claimed to be. The question was whether he should investigate his suspicions or trust that his wife would eventually share whatever secrets she was keeping. As he pulled into his office parking lot, Alexander made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find out who Priya really was, even if the truth wasn't what he wanted to hear. Alexander spent the entire morning at work staring at his computer screen, unable to focus on anything. His mind kept wandering back to Priya and all the small things that didn't add up. By lunchtime, he had made a decision that felt both necessary and wrong at the same time. He was going to visit the library where his wife claimed to work. The downtown library was a beautiful old building with tall windows and marble steps. Alexander had never been there before, despite living in the city for years. As he walked through the heavy wooden doors, he felt like he was betraying his wife's trust, but he needed answers. At the information desk sat a middle-aged woman with gray hair and kind eyes. Her name tag read, Helen, head librarian. "Excuse me," Alexander said, his heart beating fast. "I'm looking for my wife. She works here. Priya Sharma?" Helen looked confused. She tilted her head and thought for a moment. "Priya Sharma? I'm sorry, I don't recognize that name. How long has she worked here?" "About 6 months, I think, maybe longer. She said she works part-time." Helen shook her head slowly. "I know all our part-time employees. We're not a large staff. There's no one here by that name. Are you sure you have the right library?" Alexander's stomach dropped. She mentioned something about working at different branches sometimes. Maybe the downtown branch? "This is the downtown branch," Helen said gently, "and we don't rotate staff between locations very often. Could she be working at the university library? Or maybe the county system?" Alexander thanked Helen and left the library feeling dizzy. As he walked back to his car, his mind raced with possibilities. Maybe Priya had been embarrassed to tell him she had lost her job. Maybe she was working somewhere else and hadn't wanted to worry him. There had to be a reasonable explanation. But as he drove back to his office, other memories started surfacing, like the time he had offered to visit her at work, and she had quickly said they were doing renovations and wouldn't allow visitors, or when he suggested meeting her for lunch near the library, and she said her schedule was too unpredictable. That evening, Alexander tried to act normal when he came home. Priya had made his favorite dinner, and the house smelled amazing. She asked about his day, listened to his work stories, and seemed completely relaxed. But Alexander found himself studying her face, looking for signs of deception. "How was work today?" he asked casually as they ate. "Oh, the usual," Priya replied, cutting her vegetables. "We had a delivery of new books, nothing too exciting." Alexander nodded and changed the subject, but inside he felt sick. She was lying to him, and she was doing it so naturally that it scared him. Over the next few days, Alexander found himself paying attention to details he had never noticed before. When Priya's phone rang, he tried to see who was calling, but she always kept the screen turned away from him. Her mysterious Tuesday and Thursday absences continued, and now that he knew she wasn't going to the library, he wondered where she actually went. One Thursday morning, Alexander told Priya he had an important client meeting and would be home late. Instead, he called in sick to work and decided to follow her. He felt terrible about it, like he was becoming the kind of husband he never wanted to be, but he couldn't stop himself. At exactly 9:30, Priya left their house carrying a small leather bag. She walked to the bus stop, just as she always said she did. Alexander followed in his car, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen. But instead of taking the bus toward downtown, where the library was supposed to be, Priya got on a bus heading toward the expensive side of the city. Alexander's confusion grew as he followed the bus through neighborhoods where houses cost millions of dollars. Priya got off the bus at a stop near the financial district. Alexander parked his car and followed her on foot, feeling more like a detective than a husband. She walked confidently through the streets, clearly familiar with the area, until she stopped in front of a tall glass building with expensive cars parked outside. Alexander watched from across the street as his wife walked through the building's front doors like she owned the place. The sign on the building read, Shaw Industries Corporate Headquarters. Alexander's heart pounded as he stared at the building. Shaw Industries was a huge company. He had heard of them but didn't know much about what they did. Why was Priya going there? Did she have a job interview? Was she looking for a new job and hadn't told him? He waited outside for 2 hours, hiding in a coffee shop across the street. When Priya finally came out of the building, she was walking with a man in an expensive suit. They talked for a few minutes by the entrance, and the man seemed to be treating her with a lot of respect. Too much respect for someone who was just applying for a job. Alexander followed Priya back to the bus stop, then drove home quickly so he would be there when she arrived. His mind was spinning with questions, but he didn't know how to ask them, without admitting he had followed her. When Priya came home that afternoon, she seemed tired but not in a bad mood. "How was the library today?" Alexander asked, hating himself for testing her. "Busy day," Priya replied. "Lots of people returning. Books after the weekend." Alexander wanted to scream. She was lying again so easily and naturally, but he forced himself to stay calm. That night, while Priya was taking a bath, Alexander did something he never thought he would do. He went through her personal things. He felt horrible about it, but he needed to understand what was happening. In her dresser drawer, hidden under some clothes, he found a folder full of papers. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside were documents that made no sense. Business contracts, financial reports, and legal papers, all with the name Shaw Industries at the top. But what shocked him most was seeing Priya's name on many of the documents, not as an employee or contractor, but in positions of authority. One document was particularly confusing. It was a board meeting agenda, and at the top it listed Priyanka Shah, Chief Executive Officer, as the meeting leader. Alexander stared at the paper, reading it over and over. Priyanka Shah. Not Priya Sharma, the name she had given him and used at their wedding. And CEO? Of Shaw Industries. He quickly put everything back exactly where he had found it and went to bed before Priya finished her bath. As he lay there pretending to sleep, his mind tried to process what he had discovered. His wife, the simple librarian who preferred taking the bus to driving expensive cars, who wanted a modest wedding and claimed to know nothing about business, was apparently the CEO of a major corporation. She had been lying to him about everything. Her name, her job, probably even her family background. But why? What possible reason could she have for pretending to be someone completely different? Was she involved in something illegal? Was she using him somehow? As Alexander listened to Priya, brushing her teeth in the bathroom, acting like everything was normal, he realized that the woman he had fallen in love with might not exist at all. The question was, who was she really? And what did she want from him? He had thought he was getting the simple, honest marriage he had always dreamed of. Instead, he was living with a stranger who was playing a role so convincing that he had never suspected the truth. Tomorrow, he decided, he would find out exactly who Priyanka Shah was and why she had chosen to deceive him, even if the truth destroyed everything he thought he knew about his marriage. Alexander couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those documents with his wife's real name on them. Priyanka Shah, CEO. The words kept spinning in his head like a broken record. By 5 a.m, he gave up trying to sleep and went to his home office to do something he should have done months ago. He searched for Priyanka Shah online. What he found made his hands shake as he scrolled through page after page of search. Results. Priyanka Shah wasn't just any CEO. She was one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. Shah Industries was a pharmaceutical empire worth over $500 million. The company had been started by her grandfather and passed down through the family. Alexander stared at photograph after photograph of his wife at business conferences, award ceremonies, and charity events. In these pictures, she looked completely different. Her hair was styled professionally, she wore expensive suits, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who commanded boardrooms full of powerful people. The most recent articles were from about 8 months ago, right around the time he had first met Priya. The headlines made Alexander's stomach turn. Pharmaceutical heiress disappears. Shah Industries CEO missing. Family desperate for information about missing daughter. According to the news reports, Priyanka Shah had vanished without a trace. Her family had hired private investigators, offered rewards, and begged the public for information. Her disappearance had sent shockwaves through the business world because she had been in the middle of negotiating a major merger that would have made Shah Industries even more valuable. Alexander sat back in his chair, feeling like the room was spinning. His wife hadn't just lied about her job. She was a missing person. Her family thought she was dead or kidnapped, and she was living in his house, cooking his breakfast and pretending to be a librarian. But why? What could possibly make someone walk away from that kind of wealth and power to live a lie? Alexander spent the rest of the morning reading everything he could find about Priyanka Shah and her family. What he discovered painted a picture of a woman trapped by expectations and family pressure. Several articles mentioned that her grandfather had arranged for her to marry the son of another wealthy family to merge their business empires. The engagement had been announced just weeks before her disappearance. One business magazine article from 2 years earlier included an interview with Priyanka, where she talked about the challenges of being a young woman in charge of a family business. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be valued for who I am as a person, rather than what I represent, she had said. I dream about having a normal life, where people care about my thoughts and feelings, not my bank account or my family name. Alexander stared at those words for a long time. They sounded exactly like something his Priya would say. Maybe that interview had been the real her, and the simple librarian act was her way of trying to live the normal life she had dreamed about. But that still didn't explain why she had chosen him, or why she had been willing to commit to marriage, based on a lie. Alexander decided he needed professional help to understand the full situation. He called a private investigator named Rita, who had helped his company with background checks before. When she arrived at his office that afternoon, Alexander felt like he was betraying his wife all over again. "I need you to investigate my wife," he said, the words feeling bitter in his mouth. Rita raised an eyebrow. "Cheating?" "No, I think she's been lying about who she is." Alexander explained everything he had discovered. Rita listened without judgment, taking notes and asking questions. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "This is unusual," she said finally. "Usually when people lie about their identity in relationships, they're pretending to be richer or more successful than they really are. Your wife seems to be doing the opposite. Can you find out what really happened? Why she left her old life?" "Can try," Rita said, "but are you sure you want to know? Sometimes the truth is more complicated than people expect." Alexander thought about it. Part of him wanted to just confront Priya directly and ask her to explain everything. But another part of him was afraid that if he did that, she might disappear again, and he would never get the real answers. "I need to know," he said finally. Rita got to work immediately. 3 days later, she called Alexander with information that changed everything. "Your wife's story is more complicated than I expected," Rita said over the phone. "Priyanka Shah didn't just disappear randomly. She was essentially running for her life." "What do you mean?" "The man her family wanted her to marry, Vikram Malhotra, has a reputation for being controlling and abusive. I found 3 women who had relationships with him before, and all of them described him as dangerous. Priyanka had tried to break off the engagement multiple times, but her family wouldn't listen. They were more interested in the business merger than their daughter's happiness. Alexander felt sick. So she ran away? She planned her escape carefully. The family she's been living with, the ones who introduced you to, they're not just family friends. They're former employees of Shaw Industries, who have been loyal to Priyanka for years. They helped her create the new identity and have been protecting her secret. But why marry me? Alexander asked. Why not just stay hidden? Because hiding forever isn't really living, Rita explained. From what I can tell, she researched you thoroughly before agreeing to the arranged marriage. She knew about your business, your character, your values. She chose you because she believed you were someone she could trust with her real self eventually. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, processing everything. Is she in danger now? Probably not immediate danger, but her family is still looking for her. And Vikram Malhotra has been pressuring them to find her so the merger can go through. If they discover where she is, they'll definitely try to bring her back. That evening, Alexander came home to find Priya in the kitchen making dinner, just like every other day. She smiled at him and asked about his work, acting completely normal. But now Alexander saw everything differently. The way she checked the locks on the doors twice each night. How she always sat facing the entrance when they went out to eat. The careful way she avoided having her picture taken. She wasn't just pretending to be someone else. She was hiding from people who wanted to force her into a life that would make her miserable. As they sat down to eat dinner, Alexander looked at his wife and felt a mix of emotions he couldn't untangle. He was hurt that she had lied to him, but he also understood why she had felt like she had no choice. He was angry that she hadn't trusted him with the truth, but he was also amazed that she had chosen him out of everyone in the world to build a new life with. Priya, he said quietly, and she looked up at him with those same kind, intelligent eyes that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. Yes? We need to talk. Something in his tone must have warned her, because her face went very still. She put down her fork and looked at him directly. What about? She asked. But Alexander could see in her eyes that she already knew their time of pretending was over. About who you really are, Alexander said gently, and why you chose to trust me with your new life, even if you couldn't trust me with the truth about your old one. Priya's hands started shaking slightly, and Alexander realized that despite all her planning and careful lies, she was just as scared as he was about what would happen next. The silence in their dining room felt heavier than anything Alexander had ever experienced. Priya sat completely still, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. For a moment, neither of them spoke, and Alexander could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. How long have you known? Priya asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. A few days, Alexander admitted. I went to the library where you said you worked. Then I followed you to Shaw Industries. Then I hired someone to find out the rest. Priya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, there were tears running down her cheeks. I never wanted to lie to you, she said. But I didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing everything I had built here. So it's true? You're Priyanka Shah, the missing pharmaceutical heiress? Priya nodded slowly. My real name is Priyanka. Everything else about who I am now, the person you fell in love with, that's real too. The only lies were about my past. Alexander leaned back in his chair, trying to process his emotions. Tell me everything, from the beginning, the real beginning. Priya wiped her tears and started talking. Her voice was shaky at first, but it grew stronger as she continued. I was born into Shaw Industries. My grandfather built the company from nothing, and when my parents died in a plane crash when I was 22, I inherited everything. I didn't have a choice. The company, the money, the responsibility, it all fell on my shoulders whether I wanted it or not. Alexander listened without interrupting as Priya described a life that sounded like a prison made of gold. Board meetings, where men twice her age questioned every decision she made. Family members who only cared about their dividends. Social events where people pretended to be her friends because they wanted access to her wealth. The worst part was that my grandfather had made arrangements before he died. He had promised another family that I would marry their son to merge our companies. When I turned 28, they started pressuring me to honor that promise. So, man, they wanted you to marry, Alexander said. What was he like? Priya shuddered. Vikram was charming in public, but behind closed doors he was controlling and cruel. He made it clear that once we were married, I would be expected to step back from running the company and focus on being his wife and having his children. When I tried to break off the engagement, he threatened me. He said he would destroy my company and everyone who worked for it if I didn't marry him. Alexander felt a surge of anger toward a man he had never met. My family wouldn't listen to me, Priya continued. They said I was being emotional and unreasonable. They cared more about the business merger than my happiness or safety. I realized that if I stayed, I would spend the rest of my life trapped in a marriage with a man who would probably hurt me, surrounded by people who only saw me as a source of money. So you decided to disappear. It took me months to plan. Kamala Auntie and her husband used to work for my company. They were the only people I trusted completely. I asked them to help me, and they agreed. We created the identity of Priya Sharma, a simple woman from a modest family. Kamala became my fake grandmother, and her husband helped me set up bank accounts and documents under my new name. Alexander was amazed at how carefully she had planned everything. But why agree to marry me? You could have just stayed hidden. Priya looked directly at him, and for the first time since their conversation started, she smiled a little. Because I was tired of just hiding. I wanted to live, not just exist. And when Kamala told me about you and your grandmother's wish for an arranged marriage, I saw an opportunity. An opportunity? I researched you for weeks before our first meeting. I read about your business, your values, the way you treated your employees. I found interviews where you talked about wanting to find someone who would love you for who you are, not what you have. I thought maybe, if I could start fresh with someone who understood that feeling, I might finally have a chance at real happiness. Alexander felt his heart breaking and healing at the same time. So you chose me. I chose you because you seemed like the kind of man who would value honesty, kindness, and partnership over wealth and status. I chose you because when I imagined building a life with someone, you were the only person I could picture actually caring about my thoughts and dreams instead of just my bank account. But you still lied to me about everything. Priya's face crumpled. I was going to tell you. I planned to tell you after we had been married for a year, once I was sure you loved me for who I really am. But as time went on, I got scared. I was so happy with our life together. I was terrified that if you knew the truth, you would feel like I had tricked you and you would leave me. Alexander stood up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at their quiet neighborhood. Everything he had believed about his marriage was based on a lie, but everything he felt for his wife was real. Are you still in danger? He asked without turning around. Probably. My family is still looking for me, and Vikram has never given up on the merger. If they find me, they'll try to force me to come back. Alexander turned to face her. What do you want to happen now? Do you want to stay Priya Sharma forever? Do you want to go back to your old life? Do you want to divorce me and disappear somewhere else? I want to stay married to you, Priya said immediately. But I understand if you can't forgive me for lying. I understand if you feel like you can't trust me anymore. Alexander walked back to the table and sat down across from his wife. He looked at her tear-stained face and saw the same person he had fallen in love with. The woman who made him laugh, who took care of him when he was sick, who listened to his problems and offered thoughtful advice. The lies had been about her past, but her love for him was real. I'm hurt that you didn't trust me with the truth, he said slowly. But I understand why you felt like you couldn't. And I'm not going to let anyone force you back into a life that made you miserable. Hope flickered in Priya's eyes. What does that mean? It means we're going to figure this out together, as partners. No more lies between us, but also no more running and hiding. If your family wants to find you, let them find you. But they're going to find you as my wife, living the life you chose, not the life they tried to force on you. They'll try to pressure you too, Priya warned. They'll offer you money, business deals, anything to convince you to give me back to them. Alexander smiled for the first time since their conversation had started. Do they know that I'm not exactly poor myself? I built my company from nothing, just like your grandfather did. I don't need their money and I don't want their approval. I just want you. Priya started crying again, but this time they were tears of relief. I love you, she said. Not Alexander Chen, the successful businessman, but Alexander Chen, the man, who makes me feel safe and valued and understood. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. I love you too, Alexander replied. Priya, Priyanka, whoever you want to be. We'll face whatever comes next together. As they held each other in their dining room, both of them knew that their marriage was just beginning for real. They had found each other while both searching for the same thing, someone who would love them for who they truly were. Now they finally had the chance to build that life together, based on complete honesty and trust. The lies were over. Their real love story was just getting started.